Support for The Middle comes from you and from the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, preserving the story of the citizen soldier and connecting military history to the decisions citizens and leaders face today. Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Our DJ Tolliver is here as well. And Tolliver, I am at KUER Studios today in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I can guarantee you one thing, which is that our show this hour will not be as long as the State of the Union address.
We're not doing 3 hours tonight?
No, we are not doing
plans.
that. As you know, President Trump just delivered the State of the Union address. It was the longest one ever, which...
Oh, my God. Yeah, so that's why we don't do live specials anymore, remember?
After his addresses, right? Because you've got other things to do. But you know, in that lengthy speech, Tolliver, the word housing, which is our topic this hour, came up only once. The president said lower interest rates will solve what he called the Biden-created housing problem. Well, here in Utah, the Republican governor Spencer Cox gave his State of the State address last month, and he said that barriers to homeownership and affordable housing are the single greatest threat to Utah's prosperity.
Utah will not become a state of renters. We must pull every lever to increase the supply of housing, reform zoning, streamline permitting, support infrastructure, and encourage innovation. If we want strong, stable, connected families and communities throughout Utah, we have to build more homes.
Now, Utah is in the midst, like so many other places, of a housing crisis caused by high prices, high mortgage rates, and limited inventory. And that is driving up costs whether you own or you rent.
Oh, my God. The rent is too damn high, Jeremy. I can attest to that.
Yeah, well, okay. So we want to hear from you this hour, whatever you do, how you are related to the housing market. How is it affecting you? Tolliver, how can people reach us?
You can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
And joining me this hour, Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah. Jason, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
And Moody's Analytics chief economist Mark Zandi is with us as well. Mark, welcome to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Good to be with you.
Well, so Jason, you did a poll recently and found that affordable housing is the number one issue for Utah voters. Clearly very important to the governor here as well. Tell us more about what you found.
Well, it's true, and it highlights why the governor said what he did in his State of the State addresses. This is the number one thing people are thinking about. Our legislative session just started, so the governor was actually speaking as the session was going, and we asked Utahns, what are your top priorities? We gave them 8 or 9 different categories of things, everything from affordable housing to tax cuts, for example, health care. And by far, affordable housing was the number one. Every demographic, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, every age group, it was over 30% in every category. In fact, overall, 32%.
And what is making housing so unaffordable for Utahns?
Well, I think Utah is a little bit of a mirror of what we're seeing across the country. We have several things. One is we are a very young state, the youngest in the country. We are one of the fastest growing states in the country. And after the Great Recession, we had in Utah what many had in the country. We did not have enough homes being built, and more people wanting them, interest rates being where they were. There's sort of that golden handcuff issue where everyone that's got their rates, they
don't want to leave that house.
They just don't. They don't want to trade that in. And so the inventory isn't up. People are not selling. There's not the churn. And the young people, and that was what was interesting. Just one more point on that. It was 37% of Gen Z said this was their number one issue.
Wow.
It hit the young people in the state of Utah.
Okay, so Mark, none of this is unique to the state of Utah. Give us the 30,000-foot view from your perspective about the housing market in 2026 in the United States.
Well, it's tough. I mean, in terms of demand, that's home sales. It's very weak, about 4 million units. That's existing home sales. That's about as low as it gets. I mean, you have to go back into the teeth of the global financial crisis or in the pandemic to see those kinds of sales numbers. So demand is very soft, and that goes to the interest rate lock you referred to. That we got a lot of homeowners out there with mortgage rates that they got during the pandemic that are very low. They're much lower than current market rates, and it doesn't make any economic sense to move, and so they're not. Then you've got housing supply, that's home building, and that's weak. Multifamily construction has been hit pretty hard because you've had some overbuilding actually in the upper parts of the rental market. And single family is also struggling. The home builders have kept that market up for a while using various types of incentives like interest rate buy downs, which are effective cuts in prices. but that's not worked, and their inventories have risen, so they're now cutting back on the amount of homes they're building. And then you got house prices, and they did rise quite significantly during the pandemic, but they haven't for the last 3-4 years since the Fed jacked up interest rates and mortgage rates rose over 6%, and they basically have gone flat here. And that means that's nationwide. So that means if you look across the country, parts of the South and in the West, that's where you're seeing some house price decline. So I think it's fair to say that housing is the weakest part of the economy at this point.
Interesting. And do you think, Mark, just briefly, that home building, that if you were to build more homes, that would be the number one thing you could do to deal with that problem? Or is it just a lot of things that have to happen?
Well, that would certainly help in terms of the new home market. I mean, certainly, really it's about where you build. It's about building kind of entry-level homes for those folks, those Gen Zs you were talking about who want to become homeowners. That's where the shortage is most acute. I mean, at the high end of the market, there's no problem. That's where the builders have been building because they can make money doing that. That's where the returns are high enough. But they haven't been high enough for that kind of entry-level home for lots of different reasons. But if we had more construction there, that would be really beneficial. And then, of course, in the existing market, it's about really closing that interest rate gap between the rate on the existing mortgage and people's existing mortgage and on the current market rate. And that's the result of a lot of different factors that need to be considered. I will say one other thing, Jeremy. Policymakers are working on it. Interestingly enough, nothing is getting done in Washington except one thing, and that is policy around trying to improve housing supply. We might get a piece of legislation here passed before the election, and that would be very helpful.
Jason, we heard Governor Spencer Cox of Utah say he doesn't want Utah to become a state of renters. Explain that. Why do you not want to have a state of renters?
Well, there are a couple aspects, and I've talked to the governor about this after he gave this speech, and a couple things to think about. One is a home is one of the primary ways to build wealth over time.
Yep.
And so there are perfectly valid reasons why people will be renters, but if you want to start building the wealth through your life, that's part of it. The second thing is when you have that home, you build a sense of community. You belong to a place. You invest in that place, your time, your engagement.
Take care of the yard.
You do all of those things. You build community when you have one of those homes, and it even has an impact on your civic engagement. There are so many aspects of owning a home that impact a state and a community. There's economic development issues surrounding it as well. So when he said it's time for us to find ways to start that ladder of home ownership, that first home to the move up to the forever home. Each one of those has a place in our community.
Mark, this seems like something that crosses party lines, that you could find Republicans and Democrats and independents who want people to be able to afford to own a home. And in fact, you were saying there may be some federal action. It sounds like one thing that people on all sides can agree on is that they don't want institutional investors buying up a bunch of houses and driving up costs for people.
Yeah, that polls really well, Jeremy. The idea that you've got these institutional investors, these private equity firms that have gone out and bought up homes and then rent them. So buy to rent. And, that kind of resonates with people. I have to say, though, that from a policy perspective, it's pretty mixed. I mean, yes, if you stop that from happening, if the president through executive order says you can't do that, or there's other laws that are passed that limit that, that will create more homes for sale, so that should help on that regard. But it reduces the number of homes that are for rent. And as we just heard, there are lots of folks out there that are renting and paying a lot in rent. And if they got to pay more in rent, that means that it makes it more difficult for them to save to get that down payment to buy that home. So I don't know. There's a lot of things we can do and should do to address the housing shortage. I'm not sure that would be at the top of my list. And the other thing I just point out in that regard, that's the buy to rent is a very small piece of the pie. It doesn't amount to very much of the housing stock, and it's really only in the South and West where it's as significant, meaningful at all. In the Midwest and Northeast, it doesn't happen at all. So I don't know. That's not the solution. I get it politically. I know it polls well. It resonates with people.
But that's not going to fix the problem.
It's not going to fix the problem. No.
Well, and actually, when you look at the numbers, about 66% of Americans now own their own homes. The remainder rent. That figure, I was looking at the chart, it's gone up, it's gone down over the last few decades, but it's not that different. We aren't, Mark, becoming a nation of renters right now any more than we were 3 decades ago.
No, you're right. I mean, the homeownership rate, the percent of households that own their own home is about the same today as it was, 40, 50 years ago. And as you say, it goes up, it goes down, it goes all around, but it's kind of, that's where it is. I will say, though, the direction of travel is not encouraging, right? If we don't improve this affordability problem, and given the demographics, the shift towards more minorities where, Black and Latino, where homeownership rates are historically a lot lower, the homeownership rate will start to decline. So if we don't address this, if it's not addressed, I think 10 years from now, we're going to have a much lower homeownership rate, and certainly 20 years from now. So hopefully we can change those trend lines.
Well, and as I said, Jason, the average age of people that are able to buy their own home for the first time is now like 10 years higher than it was in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. And this is where that generational wealth gap is going to start. And the implications of that, I'll leave it to the economist, but that is something that ripples over time if that's not able to happen. And I'll just say one comment to that part too is, so there's the price of the homes, which is part of the factor, but it's the monthly mortgage payment that has gone up so much as well. So
especially when people have these high rates. And they did, by the way, at the latest check, they are now below 6% on average for the first time in a while. So maybe they're moving in the right direction. Speaking of which, Tolliver, as we said, President Trump thinks the issue is interest rates set by the Federal Reserve, and that if the Fed lowers them, mortgage rates will follow.
Yeah, but Fed Chair Jerome Powell has pushed back on that. Here he is talking about the housing market in December.
The housing market faces some really significant challenges. And I don't know that, a 25 basis point decline in the federal funds rate is going to make much of a difference for people. Housing supply is low. Many people have very, very low rate mortgages from the pandemic period, and they kept refinancing and caught the really low. So it's made it expensive for them to move. And, we're a ways away from that changing.
By the way, Tolliver, thing I learned as an economics reporter, 25 basis points is econo-speak for 0.25%. I don't know why they don't just say it like that. It would be a lot easier.
My head, man.
We'll be right back with your calls on The Middle.
I sold my car in Carvana last night.
Well, that's cool.
No, you don't understand. It went perfectly. Real offer, down to the penny. They're picking it up tomorrow. Nothing went wrong.
So, what's the problem?
That is the problem. Nothing in my life goes as smoothly. I'm waiting for the catch.
Maybe there's no catch.
That's exactly what a catch would want me to think.
Wow, you need to relax.
I need to knock on wood. Do we have wood? Is this table wood?
I think it's laminate.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's close enough.
Car selling without a catch. Sell your car today on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, asking how today's housing market is affecting you. Tolliver, how can people reach us?
You can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com.
And by the way, if you can't get through because all the lines are full, leave us a message and we will use it on our weekly podcast extra, The Follow-Up. I am joined by Moody's Analytics Chief Economist Mark Zandi and Jason Perry, Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah. And just before we get to the phones, Mark Zandi, we heard Jerome Powell, the Fed chair there, saying he doesn't think cutting rates will actually bring mortgage costs down the way the president hopes. What do you think?
I agree. Mortgage rates are tied to long-term interest rates, not to the short-term interest rate that the Fed controls. And long-term interest rates are stuck, the 10-year Treasury yield at 4.5%. And that incorporates the expectation of what the Federal Reserve is going to do in terms of cutting interest rates going forward. So the Fed, if it just follows through and cuts those rates, we're not going to see any change in the 10-year yield, and therefore we're not going to see any change in the mortgage rate. So you can't count on the Fed to get mortgage rates down. They run independently of that. So I totally agree. That's not the way to go.
So how do you get them down? Just have an economic collapse?
Well,
that's the easiest way.
To be frank, I think we got to settle in here and realize that these are the rates that we're going to live with. Now, rates go up and they go down. They go up. They're a function of what's going on in the economy and the business cycle and everything else. But when you cut through all the ups and downs and all the rounds in the business cycle, it's going to be around 6%. So that's reality. That's the world we live in. And if you're a prudent planner and thinking about this, that's the interest rate you should count on. So I wouldn't count on rates coming in. That's not going to bail us out here in terms of the affordability issues.
All right, let's get to the phones. Mike is calling in from Franklin, Wisconsin. Mike, how is the housing market affecting you?
Well, it's affected my family more than me. I'm 73 years old. I grew up with a very strong middle class where employment was very, very strong and pay was very high, and people had families, and that's not the case right now. The housing market is very, very high. It's a lot higher than what people can afford. And I don't know that having a house is necessarily the American dream anymore as it is. We need to find a solution so that individuals can have the type of housing that they want.
Are you a homeowner yourself?
I have been. I have been a homeowner since the early 80s. When we bought our first home, interest rates were 18%. I was on a land contract with the owner who I managed to get it at 12. Inflation was really, really high, but I was working for a very strong employer, and so I knew that my income was secure going forward, and I wasn't going to be moving anywhere. So I ended up working for that place for 30 years. And when you have that type of stability in an area where people are going to put in roots and you know that they're going to stay, then they're not worrying about, well, let's see, okay, now I got to worry about selling my house in a couple of years. Not because they can't afford it, but because I'm moving.
Yeah. Mike, thank you for that. Jason, when you hear him say you need to have a strong economy, you need to have strong employment in order for people to be able to afford to have a home, he thinks that is slipping away and homeownership may not be part of the American dream anymore.
Well, I would say, particularly people I talk to, the American dream still exists, but it's under strain. That is the reality. You talk to people still with a goal that they have, but there's so many factors that are impacting that being a reality. I still think, even though there are so many complications here and so many things that have to be done at the federal and particularly at the state level, it is still the aspiration for so many, realizing that this is the path, not for financial success, but also for community success.
Let's go to Jane, who's calling from Concord, Massachusetts. Jane, go ahead. How is the housing market affecting you?
Hi. Okay, I'm a previous homeowner. I'm 65. My husband and I both owned places before we ended up owning a separate house together, so I'm in a position of privilege looking to get back into the housing market, but at not too big of a house or too extreme cost, which we have here in Massachusetts. So my point is, people like me who have built up equity in the past or who have money in the stock market can make a huge down payment that someone starting out just doesn't have that opportunity. So it's extremely competitive. And if you make things so-called more affordable, like a 50-year mortgage that Donald Trump suggested, or try to lower interest rates, you open up competition, which drives prices up. So I think that with baby boomers downsizing, it's hard for young people to compete. And I don't think renting is so horrible. We need more housing density and more rental opportunities.
Yeah, Jane, thank you for that. Mark Zandi, a lot there, but I mean, just the focus on young people and how difficult it is for them to get into this housing market right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a statistic, Jeremy. If you go back, say, from 1980 through 2010, so in the wake of the housing bust and the global financial crisis, and take a look at the house prices to income, the median house price divided by the median household income, that was about 3.5 times. It surged in the after the financial crisis, surged during the pandemic when rates were very low. We're now at 5 or 5.5 times, and that's historically high. So, if you look at that, and you're assuming that mortgage rates are at 6%, and that's roughly where they're going to be, that makes it very difficult to become a first-time home buyer. It's very, very tough to be able to do that. Another way of looking at it is the average mortgage payment, before the pandemic. And I'm making these numbers up, so it's only roughly right, about $1,000 a month. Today, it's well over $2,000 a month. So it just gives you a sense of how...
Just in the last several years.
just since the pandemic. Go 2019, it was $1,000. Today, it's $2,000, a little over $2,000. So just gives you a sense of how daunting this is and how difficult it's going to be.
Yeah.
I will say, there are things that, and the caller was right about policies that work to improve demand. I mean, it's very simple. It's demand. If you want affordability, you need prices that are more consistent with incomes, and it's about demand and supply. You really don't want to do policies that are going to juice up demand. So that would be like lower interest rates. That would be the 50-year mortgage. That would be assumable mortgages, portable mortgages, those kinds of proposals. You really want to focus on the supply side and try to incent more building, particularly in parts of the lower end of the for sale market to help those first-time home buyers. In manufactured housing would be another good case in point. And so anything that we can do to support that, and Congress is working on some of those things, that would be very helpful in trying to address this problem.
Jason Perry?
Well, it was an interesting comment to this insightful question from the caller, too. And as we talk about supply, she mentioned about people downsizing, which is what often happened when the family moves out. But with the interest rates being where they are, that is a reality. That is not happening as much. It's not happening in Utah as much as you're seeing. The downsizing is not happening.
Because you might have a 2.8% interest rate on your current mortgage, and you're going to hop into a 6% on the next one. And why would you want to do that? Because you're going to be spending so much more per month on that payment.
Hey, Jeremy, just one other thing on that point, really important, I think, is capital gains, right? The capital gains, when you sell your home, you have to pay capital gains tax if you make any money. There's an exclusion, so below this a certain amount, I think it's $250K per individual, $500K for a household. You don't pay on that, but anything above that you pay. Those caps on the cap gains exclusion were set back in 1997. Think about inflation and house price growth since then. So that means that a lot of these boomers that are in these big homes where they raise their kids, they're not going to sell because they don't. Particularly in a place like Massachusetts, they're just not going to sell because they have that big tax bill. They're just going to wait and bequeath the home to the kid, and when that happens, the house price. The capital gains goes away because the house price, the basis goes up to the current market value. So one thing that could be done is to change those exclusions, raise those exclusions, particularly for seniors, people over the age of 65. And I think that would go a long way to kind of unlocking that market and getting the market moving again.
Well, I just want to put this out there because usually when I ask for things on this show, I get them in terms of who I want to call in. If we have some Gen Z listeners who are in this conversation, I would love it if you called at 844-4MIDDLE, 844-464-3353. Tolliver, what is coming in at listentothemiddle.com?
Zeke in St. George, Utah says, my wife and I are having to move into a destination camping trailer to be able to afford a house while being able to save for owning a home. Teresa in Madison says, when you budget your mortgage payment, yes, the cost of the house and the interest are high, but escrow and insurance are rising as well. And then LD in Colorado says housing prices are way too high, home sellers are greedy, and real estate agents feed that. Lots and lots of responses coming in,
Wow, again, listentothemiddle.com. Let's go to Tim, who's calling in from Tallahassee, Florida. Tim, how is the housing market affecting you?
Hi, good evening. So basically, I'm a new homeowner. I'm 34 years old. My partner and I have been residents in town for about 4 years now, and we were priced out of our South Florida home 4 years ago and forced into out of our previous apartment for almost similar reasons and a power outage from neglected preventative maintenance. We always wanted a house, but the pitfalls of rent were always preventing us from being able to save. And now we have a home at 6.5%. I paid $160 for, but it's a trailer that had $4,000 worth of repairs before closing. I had some help, but it means it's between rent and basically it's between rent and a mortgage that's not going to go up. I lament that I got a 6.5% finance since it just went down recently and it hasn't been down since 2022. But in consideration, I feel very lucky, and I wish it was easier for other people to not have to worry about the pitfalls of continuing to save for rent and other expenses that continue to go up while the housing market just also appears to keep going up. So we got pretty lucky in this one. But
let me just, so you say you got lucky. Do you feel like you've achieved a part of the American dream by owning this trailer home?
Well, in a sense, I feel like I won in the big race, but at the same time, I have a bit of guilt because we are in a position where I had the money coming from a family member to help me out. Other people are not as gifted in that sense. It's coming from a place of privilege, but I take a moment of gratitude every day I can because it helps me get to sleep at night, and I only wish that I could help give back what was given to me in this aspect. So I try to really appreciate what I have.
That's great, Tim. Thank you so much for that call. Jason, just gratitude there from Tim.
That's the heart of this whole thing. So when you start talking about housing affordability, what you get from him is how personal this is.
Yeah.
They feel it in every way. And even right now, he found a place that Tim clearly was happy about, and he feels so fortunate to have it. He is starting, which maybe gets to one of your questions. Is the American dream still there? Tim's proving, yes, it was what he wanted, and he feels great gratitude when he found it.
Yeah. And Karen is calling in from Loveland, Colorado. Karen, what about you? How are you being affected by the housing market?
Well, it was funny that it came up because I actually just paid off my mortgage on Tuesday. I've been paying on it for I paid a little early, so 27 some years. And I do feel the same as some of these callers where I just want younger people to be able to have access to that. Both my sister and I, we bought houses super young. Like I, quote unquote, bought my house when I was 22, but that was back in 2000, and I was essentially a subprime mortgage. Like they probably, with the pay that I was getting as a teacher, they probably shouldn't have given this house to me, but I was able to weather that through the financial crisis. And those ideas of those things that have happened in the past that have also negatively affected this even more, and how even there were local bankers like not giving mortgages, or how banks are consolidating mortgages, and all those different things that have happened over time, I think are also just working against this so much. And as it's still a teacher, the idea that the students that I'm teaching now might never be able to see this happen for them is super sad.
Let me ask you one question, Karen. Are you going to, now that you've paid off your mortgage, do you plan to stay in this house forever?
Yes, at this point, my family situation hasn't changed in a way that I need to move. I do wonder, I was saying that my house was actually built in the 50s, and I love it, and it's great, but since I live in the West, that it is something where people buy houses to flip them and sell them for more immediately, or buy up houses to rent them. I don't want that to happen to my house. And so I do plan to stay here and leave that generational wealth to my niece and nephew. But I'd love a family to be able to someday be in this house that has been such a great thing for me.
Yeah. Karen, thank you. Mark Zandi, you don't hear every day from somebody who's paid off their mortgage. That seems like a rare thing these days.
Well, it's interesting, Jeremy. This might surprise you. And again, I'm making up the data a little bit. So if you chat GPT, you might find I don't have it exactly right. But
they're not always right either. But
there's probably about 90 million homeowners out there, and about half of them don't have a mortgage, or very little mortgage. So it's really about 50 million Americans that have a mortgage. The others have paid it off or pretty darn close, so it's not quite the problem that you might expect. There's a lot of people who have invested a lot in their homes, and I would just want to second the point that home ownership is I think absolutely critical for particularly middle income Americans. In terms of their ability to save for their own retirement, for their child's education, and other needs. Because they just don't own stocks, right? I mean, it's not the folks in the top part of the distribution of income that's where the stock ownership is high. In the middle part of the distribution, they just don't own any stock. They're not benefiting from the run up in the stocks of AI hyperscalers, and they need that home and the equity in that home.
Well, the other thing about that, let me just say on that issue is that when you own a home and you're making that payment, first of all, you're putting equity into something that you could get back out if you're able to sell it, but also it is something that you use every day, unlike a stock. If you own a stock, what are you going to do with it? Right.
And also, it is an investment. House prices in the United States, they don't everywhere in the world, but in the United States, historically, they increase. They increase at least at the pace of income growth, which is 3 or 4% per annum, and that's nationwide. In some parts of the country, more supply-constrained parts of the country, on the coast, for example, you get 4%, 5%, 6%. So it's a levered return, right? Because you've borrowed. If you have a mortgage, you've borrowed money to finance that purchase. So your returns are much, much better than you're going to get on any other type of investment. So it is a very good investment in the long run, and absolutely critical for the financial well-being of middle-income Americans.
Tolliver, just before we go to break, any more comments coming in?
Yeah, Joe says, I'm 68 years old and I've never owned a home. I've never wanted to own a home. In reality, you never own a home because the government has a thing called eminent domain, and the government will take your property. And then Margaret says, no one talks about how many homeowners own more than one property, i.e. a permanent residence plus a vacation property. Muy interesante.
Well, now somebody has talked about it. Tolliver, Americans have been clamoring for lower interest rates, but it is important to remember, as we've heard this hour, that they were much higher in the past.
Yeah, listen to a clip from this 1982 news report from WAVY in Virginia about a ceiling on interest rates, and listen to what that number is.
Some say it will mean a boost for local home sales. The interest rate ceiling on FHA and VA loans dropped to 14%, down 1.5 points, and the lowest rate since spring of last year. Nearly half the people who buy homes in Tidewater do so through VA or FHA. Following on the heels of a falling prime rate, the president-elect of the Tidewater Board of Realtors thinks it will have a positive impact on potential home buyers.
They've been hearing for the last couple of years about high interest rates, the prime being 19, 20%, and so on. And now they're hearing that the interest rates are coming down.
See, this is why we do historical tape, Tolliver, because we've got to give the people context. Maybe 6% is not so bad.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Right? Okay. More of your calls coming up on The Middle. This is The Middle.
From hidden Mediterranean gems to the wilderness of Antarctica, Silversea invites you to explore the world in greater depth. Venture to over 900 destinations across all 7 continents. On board small ships that set the standard for elite ocean travel. Every journey opens doors to extraordinary discoveries. And wherever you sail, you can expect the same Silversea promise. Unrivaled service, unmatched comfort, and unforgettable memories. Visit silversea.com to learn more.
I'm Jeremy Hobson at KUER Studios in Salt Lake City, Utah. In this hour, we're asking how today's housing market is affecting you. I'm joined by Jason Perry, the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah, and Moody's Analytics chief economist, Mark Zandi. Our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. The lines are full. Let's go to Tanya, who's right here where I am in Salt Lake City. Tanya, how's the housing market affecting you?
Yeah, as a 45-year-old woman, it's been part of an American dream of mine that I don't see becoming a reality. I've never been a homeowner, and with rent prices being as high as they are, for like right now I'm paying over $3,000.
Wow.
There's no way I can save. And we could qualify for a VA loan, my husband and I, but the houses that the VA would qualify us for, we can't afford a monthly payment. So it's just not a reality for us.
So you're taking that money that you would be able to put into a home to save for yourself, and you're having to pay that in rent instead, so you don't get anything at the end of the day. Tanya.
She's thinking about
maybe she's gone. But Jason Perry, really very interesting. They're talking about the inability to save as a result of the amount of money she's having to spend on rent here in Salt Lake City, Utah, which, it's very fast growing, as you say, but it's not one of the most expensive cities in the country by any stretch.
So it's not. It's so good to have Tanya calling. But this, really what I take from her comment, too, is not just the struggle, but why elected officials are saying what they're saying. It's why you hear President Trump talking about it in the State of the Union. That's why you saw Governor Cox in Utah talking about this being a top priority. What Tanya is experiencing and what she's describing to us is happening across the whole country, even in the state of Utah, where it's all sort of relative, in terms of where you're living. It's still just too expensive. She wants that, and some things are going to have to happen for that supply to increase, and there are things that elected officials are going to have to do to tackle these hard issues.
Let's go to Plamena, who's calling in from Chicago, Illinois. Hi, Plamena. What about you? How's the housing market affecting you?
Hi. Thank you for having me. Luckily, we were fortunate enough to kind of purchase at the right time and, refinance at the right time. But now what's happening is, since we refinanced 3 years ago, or maybe 2, our home value has gone up $100,000. And that is increasing our property taxes in turn. And that's, for us, that's still okay. But there are areas of Chicago, especially ones that are being gentrified, where people, especially on a fixed income, who may have already paid off their homes, who are in retirement, are being priced out of their homes by the increase in the property taxes.
Yeah, and just also the increase in the values of everything. I'm glad you brought up gentrification, Mark Zandi. There are so many places like what Plamena is talking about where there are people who have lived there for decades, and then they get affected by the fact that the neighborhood around them is gentrifying and everything gets more expensive for them. But they can't necessarily sell and move somewhere else, especially now with interest rates and prices being so high.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem. I mean, we focus on mortgage rates, but there's a lot of other housing costs, property taxes being one of them. The other is homeowners insurance. That's, risen quite a bit in many communities. That goes back to the storms and climate issues, and it's put a lot of pressure on the insurance industry, and they've been pushing up those insurance rates, and in many cases not stopping to provide insurance altogether. And that's becoming more of an issue. So the problems with affordability go beyond the house price. It goes to the mortgage rate, but it also goes to these other costs, which are quite considerable. And that's just another area where policymakers need to focus to try to rein those prices in, or at least stop them from rising further. But that goes to the broader point in that the housing affordability problem is there's no simple fix here, right? It took us almost a decade or two to get into this mess. I can't see us getting out of this anytime soon. It's going to take some time and a lot of hard work and kind of a persistent policy response to make our way through. And it's not going to happen next year.
And just briefly, Mark, we have a different system than a lot of other countries around the world. Like, is there anybody that does housing in a better way that we should be trying to emulate?
Well, No, I think if you go across the world, this is a problem pretty much everywhere. If you go into Europe, if you go into Australia, you go into Canada, they've got the same kinds of issues. And, one of the issues we haven't talked about that's, common to all these areas is zoning restrictions and permitting issues, right? I mean, there's been, particularly since the pandemic, it's gotten, zoning restrictions have become more severe, the permit costs have risen. And that's just making it incredibly difficult to build the kinds of homes that we need. Those are homes for those folks that want to be first-time home buyers, those entry-level homes. So that's an issue across the globe. And there are different systems around the world, but I don't think that's the issue. I think it's common across the globe.
Yeah, zoning and regulation, Jason Perry.
This is one of the key factors. That's what our governor was talking about and our elected officials have to talk about. It's interesting, in the state of Utah, cities are political subdivisions of the state. So you can get some directive from our state government on what to do, but it's one of those resistance factors right there is the local communities, they don't want the state to tell them what to do. The state doesn't want the federal government to tell them what to do. But to get to those issues that Mark was just talking about on zoning, for example, or some loans, for example, to work on infrastructure, those are all going to require the cities to make some decisions to do that. But when it comes to things like density and the duplexes, those are the kinds of things where people say, we really need it somewhere else. And that becomes a big issue inside around the country, in the state of Utah as well, as you start talking about density and these starter homes, where are they going to be built?
Let's go to Joseph, who's calling in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hi, Joseph. What are your thoughts?
Hi, Jeremy, and Tolliver, your wonderful guest. The thing is, Jeremy, is this. Here in Philadelphia, a lot of my friends, they've been running all kinds of obstacles to be first-time home buyers. And our mayor, Sherelle Parker, she put a big housing plan before city council the other week. But the problem, Jeremy, and to your guest, there's none of the problems because, like they said earlier, they worry about institutional investors buying up all their homes, number one. And number two, city workers, especially sanitation workers, even though they work for the city, they're not really making a livable wage and stuff like that. So in Mayor Parker's mind, affordable houses, a house starting at $100,000 a year, and stuff. And I'm saying to myself, that's unrealistic because a lot of people can't even afford that. So that's where the problem is coming at here in Philadelphia, is that people frustrated because they don't make enough money to afford a house that's $100,000 and stuff. And then you got people worried about these developers or institutional investors buying up all the houses. So it's a mess in Philadelphia. You ever come to Philadelphia, you'll see just what I'm talking about, Jeremy, okay?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. I really appreciate that comment, and I'm glad we got to the issue of institutional investors. Again, I want to get to another call here. Lawrence, who's calling in from Murray, Utah. Lawrence, go ahead with your thoughts. How's the housing market affecting you?
I could go on for a long time, but I'll try and be succinct because I know you got limited time.
Thank you, yes.
I am best definition could be called self-sheltering homeless. And I have no money to buy or rent anything. I live in a 53-foot commercial trailer, which I own on a heavy equipment storage lot. And I pay my rent by working on the lot as on-site management and security. And the thing that bothers me when everybody says we need to put up more affordable housing is that we have, as I understand this statistic, it's a couple years old, but for the nation, there are 3 empty houses standing empty for every homeless person. And in the state of Utah, there are 6 houses standing empty for every homeless person. Why are we not looking into the idea of doing something about making those people rent or sell at a price that can be afforded and redefining what affordable housing is as far as how much it costs? Because if you're renting a studio apartment for $2,000 a month, and that's not affordable to the people who would be willing to take a studio. It's nowhere near affordable. I've lived for years on $1,000 or less per month, and the only way I've done it and still not been on the street homeless is because of the trailer which I own.
Yeah. Lawrence, I really appreciate you calling in. You brought up a lot of important things there. Mark Zandi, first of all, homelessness. He says he's near homeless. And as he's talking about people not living in their homes, I think of a place like San Francisco, which during, leading up to the pandemic, all these rich people came in with the tech money, and then they left, and then the place was empty, and then the homelessness population just exploded there. How does homelessness fit into what we're talking about here?
Well, I mean, I think it really just goes back to the shortage of homes. And of course, the homelessness are the most vulnerable, and they suffer the most as a result of the lack of housing. And it really goes back to supply. We need to, as a nation, work on incentives to improve the amount of supply that's available. And again, there's no smoking gun solution here. I think it's a lot of little things. But I'll give you one example of something that's in the legislation making its way through Congress. And it's to change the requirements for a permanent chassis on a manufactured home. Believe it or not, you need the permanent chassis, and that makes it very complicated to build a manufactured home, and build it in an affordable way. And this legislation would ease that requirement and eliminate it, and as a result, make it a lot easier to build manufactured housing. Manufactured housing is good housing, but it's for folks that have lower incomes and where affordability is a real issue. And if you can build more of this is particularly important in the South and the West. This is a big part of their housing stock. And if we can build more, and just to give you a number, we put up about 100K in manufactured housing every year. We put up 1.5 million in single multifamily starts. So it's a very small part of the stock. But if we can double that, get back to something that we've had historically, that's the kind of housing that would help ease the pressure for homelessness. So that's, in my mind, the solution, or at least part of the solution. Of course, homelessness is a big problem, lots of different issues involved, but housing is a key part of it. And if we can build more of those homes, take the pressure off, that would be helpful, particularly in those communities.
All right, Tolliver, I got my Gen Z caller. Here we go. Alex in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Alex, go ahead.
Hi. So I'm calling in because ever since college, I've been renting and kind of resigned myself to the fact that I would be doing that for the rest of my life. Very similar to the situation of Tanya and most people my age, where there's just not a lot of room for saving. And then, unfortunately, I ended up losing both of my parents, so I sold their house. I'm an only child, so, I got that lump sum as well as my inheritance from their savings. And that is the only way that I will be able to afford a house And I don't think that, people my age should have to go through the worst event of their life to be able to have the money saved up to do that.
Absolutely not. And let me ask, why is it so important to you to buy and own a home? You're in your 20s?
Yeah, I'm in my late 20s.
And why is it so important to you, as somebody in their late 20s, to buy and own a home?
I've had to move a ton in, I would say, the short amount of time I've been out of college, and you never feel stable. The rent increase every year, it hurts. It's a surprise, and I've just never been able to feel permanent, I guess, probably since I was a kid. It's important to have a place that's actually mine.
Alex, I really appreciate your call. Thank you. Jason Perry, your thoughts?
Well, I think Alex brings such a very important perspective. And part of this is she's describing the importance of that home to her and to the community. And I think that message is helpful when you start talking about communities that need maybe not just the big homes, but you need the duplex and the fourplex and those kinds of things. And for the people in the community saying, that's great somewhere else, but we don't want this here in this particular community. I think that's an important message. What she was just talking about is think about you, but think about your family. Think about the kids down the road. All of those folks need to have some kind of connection to this, and it does extend through the economy. I think that maybe that message could be better delivered in some of our local communities when you say, hey, just not in my backyard. Well, maybe you think about your backyard as a little bit more extended than what you're thinking about.
She also brings up the fact that she is able to do this because basically of inheritance. And we've heard so many people this hour talk about how they needed help from their parents in order to, is that something that occurred 30, 40 years ago, or were people able to kind of do it on their own?
Well, my observation is, and I'll leave it to Mark on the historical numbers there was a time when you just kind of, the income was keeping up with those mortgage rates and you're able to afford that house. That is just becoming less and less possible now, exactly like your caller just said.
Mark?
Yeah, no, I think historically people could afford to purchase a home without significant help from their parents, but that has changed. I think increasingly the wealth is really among the boomers, and the boomers are transferring that wealth to their kids, which are the millennials and ultimately other generations. So I think that wealth transfer among generations has become a much more critical part of home ownership than it has been historically, and it goes just to affordability, the same problem, being able to afford a home, just very, very difficult for someone who's young to be able to do that in the context of all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah. I'm going to sneak in one more call, and it's going to be Charity in Ogden, Idaho. Charity, go ahead with your thoughts about the housing market.
It's actually Ogden, Utah.
I was misinformed here, but yes, that makes more sense. Okay, so go ahead, Charity.
So as I'm listening, my husband's in real estate. He's a broker. He's down about 25, maybe 75% of his income, making about 25%. But just to add in the mix and discuss, his dad is first-generation American, and his clientele are often first-generation American in Ogden. And my husband has about 11 listings from residents that are leaving. So it is interesting to see how that's kind of playing out in the market. So I don't know what that does, but it is an interesting scenario. We're Gen X fire, so we spend little, save a lot, and our mortgage is almost paid off.
Got it. Okay, well, good for you. Well, thank you for that call. Mark Zandi, it sort of brings me to something I just wanted to ask you about as we wrap up this hour. We have been talking about new home construction as one solution, but I was reading there are many issues with that right now. There's a shortage of labor because of the immigration crackdown. There are higher costs for materials because of the tariffs. Are Trump's policies on other things actually making the housing market worse?
Yeah, I think you laid it out nicely. I mean, the tariffs raise construction costs because we import a lot of construction material from all over the world. And, the heavy-handed immigration policy is really had a factor in terms of cost of labor. I mean, if you look nationwide, just about a third of all construction workers nationwide are foreign-born. Now, they're both legal and undocumented, but that's about a third. And there's only agriculture has a higher share. And that's nationwide. If you look in the parts of the South and the West where the housing shortage is most acute, it can be as high as 50%. So, yeah, very clearly these policies have been counterproductive in trying to help with regard to the housing shortage and the affordability issues.
Affordability at the end of our, this has come up so many times this hour. There it is. Moody's Analytics Chief Economist Mark Zandi and Jason Perry, Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us.
Thanks, Jeremy. Glad to be with you. Appreciate it.
And a big thanks to David Childs, Brian Albers, and Christy Miners here at KUER. Next week, we're going to be talking about the Epstein files. We want to know if the revelations coming out matter to you as a voter heading into the midterm elections.
And if you've got thoughts, and I'm sure you do, go to listentothemiddle.com and send us a note, and then sign up for our free weekly newsletter.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Brandon Condritz, and Marina Price. Our technical director is Steve Mork. Thank you, Utah, for the skiing. It's been wonderful so far. That's the nice thing about coming and doing the show from here at KUER. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I will talk to you next week.